Hi, welcome back to Our Town. My name is Chip Harrington. I'll be your host once again this week. This is our weekly show where we try to profile different people or issues we have here in the Pioneer Valley on a regular basis. And today, I'm hoping to kind of kick off a small business or family business kind of program that we're going to start with. And I've invited Mr. Ira Bryck, who is the director of the Family Business Center up at UMass Amherst. We're going to be talking to Ira about what the center does for family businesses, the importance of family business and small businesses here in the Pioneer Valley, and the benefits, the true benefits to owning a business here in the Pioneer Valley. And with the benefits certainly comes along some of the struggles. I myself have been a local business owner for about 9 years and have certainly felt the ups and downs of the economy and everything else that goes along with it. So I thought this might be a good opportunity for anybody out there who's thinking about maybe starting their own business or is currently involved in a family business to find out, what other resources might be out there for benefits for anybody who's thinking of pursuing some kind of a career path that way. So, Ira, thank you very much for coming in.
Thank you for inviting me. Nice to be here.
Yeah. Well, before we talk about the Family Business Center up at UMass Amherst, tell us about yourself and how did you get involved as director of this?
Well, I grew up in family business. It was something that I knew a lot about before I even knew that it was something that was not 100% of all business. It's only 80 to 90% of all business. My mother's father, my grandfather, had a wholesale business on the Lower East Side of Manhattan, bedding and bath, in an area that was all at the time Jewish wholesalers. It's now been pretty much taken over by Chinatown as it spreads through Lower New York. My father's father had a general store in southern part of Queens. At the time, it was considered the country. Now it's very urban. They were the only store in town. My father and his 4 sisters and his parents lived above the store. My grandfather would always say, if you need anything, there's the register, but when I need you, get down here. And so my father worked for my mother's father for years after the war, and then went in with a cousin in the store that I started in when I was 5 and worked there all through my teen years till I was 15. Then I escaped. I got working papers and started working in restaurants. And my father used to tell me, if all else fails, there's always the family business, which I interpreted as, if you're a failure, you can come here. So I never wanted to go into that business. But after a couple of years of teaching elementary school, I did go in there and spent 17 years as co-owner with my parents and president, and we eventually closed that in its 90th year. It was the oldest children's clothing store in the country at the time. Oh,
wow. That's interesting. It's funny your father mentions it kind of that you always have the family business to fall back on, because when I opened my own business, I kind of felt a similar way. It's almost like farming. It's almost like you live and die with your successes and your failures, should there be any. But at the same time, regardless of how the economy goes, you always felt like you had something there, some sort of income to kind of keep it going. My wife is a nurse, so she doesn't really work in my business. So when we opened this, it felt like it was an adventure at the same time, but if it worked out, which it did, thankfully, we felt like it would at least provide some stability for the family. And do you think most families...
And it's yours. It's the ownership mentality. My father was very big on little proverbs in English and Yiddish and would mangle them a lot, but he would always say, if you own your own business, you'll never be rich, but you'll never starve. And so we sort of managed to not starve too.
Yeah, that is very true. So growing up in the area, in the environment that you did a lot of your family friends, did a lot of people own their own business? Was everybody kind of self-sustaining in that way?
Well, at least in my family, which I had a big family on both sides, only 2 sisters, but my extended family was very large. Almost everybody worked for themselves. That's why I say I just thought that the whole world was family business. And it pretty much is. It's 80 to 90% of all companies in the U.S. It's 100% of companies. I had an Indian student worker for a while, and she said, I don't know why you keep saying that 80% is so high. In India, the utilities are family-owned, the government's family-owned, and I guess you could say that parts of our government are family-owned also. But yeah, I was surrounded by it. A lot of my friends, their parents had their own companies. This was people coming back from World War II or the Korean War, and this was the best opportunity for them to just get into their family business.
And even here in the Pioneer Valley that we live in, you see most of the towns are kind of built around the center of a business. Like in Ludlow, where I'm from, we had the mills, and most of the people worked within those mills. It wasn't necessarily a family business, it was a large corporation, but the offshoot of that was you had somebody open up a cleaners, you had somebody else open up, you know, the small businesses that are going to support everything else. But that was at a time, and I'm sure it was the same in Queens, before cars were prevalent. You walked to your current your little store at the corner,
right.
Or you walked to, you know, get.
Right. Well, our store was very dependent on, especially in the children's shop, on what they used to call the carriage trade. People with baby carriages, how far could they go? And a lot of times it was one car. The husband would take it to work, and the wife would be home with the kids and walk into our store. Eventually, because of some specialties that we had, we grew. We had suits and dresses and special occasion clothing, communion and christening, and Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts and parochial schools, so people came from further away. But yeah, it was very dependent on the locals, and I knew a lot of people face to face, and that is something that is still one of the benefits of doing business locally. And I was a sociology minor in college, and there was a concept called Gesellschaft versus Gemeinschaft. Gesell means friend, and face to face in a small town, you know who you're doing business with. And people would come into my store and say to me and my parents, you know why I shop here? I want to give you my money. And I would say, you can also shop here because we're cheaper than Macy's and Filene's and Bloomingdale's. But, you know, they liked that reason better.
Yeah, yeah. And you know, in the 50s, when, you know, highways became more prevalent, people got in their cars and started just driving everywhere. And but I think that mentality, I see it in my store anyways. I could tell you at 5 o'clock when that car pulls up, I know what that customer's coming in to get, and you almost can start getting things ready because they're just creatures of habit. And that's what my business is kind of really relies on, that everyday customer.
Right.
Up at the,
where everybody knows your name.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly right. And so up at the Family Business Center, what kind of benefits do you guys provide for local and small businesses?
Well, we are odd for a university program. When I hear about, you know, what goes on in the politics and the strategies of UMass, I'm very interested in it, and I like to see how a large organization like that works. And I've actually taken a lot of the practices when I consult a small business, and I'm saying, here's how a search committee, I've been on several search committees, and I really enjoy that experience at UMass. Here's how a search committee works at a large public university that has affirmative action issues, and, you know, why don't you have affirmative action for family business? In other words, if you're going to interview, you know, 10 people, one of whom is your daughter, why don't you make it that if your daughter and another finalist are equal in every way, your daughter has affirmative action, she gets the post. But if she's not the best candidate, she doesn't get the post. And I've had conversations with family where they'll say, okay, the policy that I'd prefer, and it's their business, they can hire whoever they want, is 80% advantage or 20% advantage. If my daughter is 80% as good as the next finalist, we're going to give the advantage to my family member. So they knowingly are what they call sub-optimizing to make it more of a family business. That's not true in every case. I mean, so we create a community. It's 65 member companies, and actually 80 if you count the number of people that have more than one business, and there's members of the center that have 3 businesses. And they're mostly small and medium-sized companies. When we first started, we got a few of the largest companies in the area to join. They were trying to be supportive and so on, but they just were not the type of company that sits in a seminar with the small and medium. You know, people find their own level, like in a fish tank. And so we're mostly small and medium-sized companies. They come to a series of events that we put on. We hold them in local catering halls. It's very comfortable, and it's different than a lot of other sorts of business organizations. I mean, all of our members belong to all those other sorts of trade groups and chambers and rotaries and so on, but there's an environment that we've created where people can be very honest and frank, and we have 10,000 years of combined experience in the room. There's nobody that has gone through anything that I could not introduce them to another person who has fallen trying to do that and gotten back up and can advise this other business owner. So even though we bring in all sorts of really interesting, useful speakers from academia, from business owning, authors of great books, all sorts of panel discussions. I've written 3 plays about family business that we've put on all over. It's the conversations between business owners that I think makes our organization the most unique, whether it's in our dinner forums or our round tables, or just when I say, Chip, you should call Larry and have lunch together and discuss this. And they do it because they're hungry to find solutions.
So somebody like myself, if I were to contact the Family Business Center and just say, hey, I'm currently struggling with this or something like that, you can put them in touch with, or you've got some people that have already kind of walked the walk and can advise other people?
Well, I make it my business to keep my ear to the ground. And part of my personality is, I guess you'd say in Yiddish, I'm a little bit of a yenta. I like to find out what your story is. I talk to a lot of people and they'll say, well, I'm not really a family business, I'm a corporation. I'm saying that's apples and oranges.
Yeah.
Corporation is your legal status, your tax status. Family business is, do you work with your family members? And even so, we have members that are partners or sole proprietors, and the partners might be more siblings than they are with their own sibling. I mean, actually, that's one of the problems of a family business is a lot of people succeed working together if they're siblings or cousins or parents and children, but they're so tired of each other at the end of the day that they don't socialize as much as they should. Some people have more of a family feeling for people that are not actually their relatives. And they get a lot out of, even a sole proprietor, which in our case we have members that are sole proprietors, that may have at one point worked with parents or children or siblings and it didn't quite work out. So they're in a sole proprietor stage right now. But these things are, in the world of family business, you can go from a butterfly to a caterpillar and back to a butterfly and back to a caterpillar and then turn into a hedgehog for a while. Or, so we get all sorts of people and they learn from each other's experiences.
It's interesting you mentioned that because, one thing, when I first started my business, I went to this, Massachusetts had this small business development group.
Still a very good group.
Yeah, and worked with a man by the name of Alan Cronick. I don't know if you know Alan or not.
He's still there.
Yeah, he was outstanding. He really was. And I had never owned a business. I worked in this kind of field when I was in college and things like that. But they made me look at every aspect, the 5-year plan. How are you going to do it? What are you going to do in this situation? And it was nice to kind of force you to look at the entire project that you're looking to undertake. So, but that's the launch. So I guess your organization, the Family Business Center, is once you're established, you kind of, this is how you can keep the ship afloat in many cases.
Well, first of all, we work together with the Small Business Development Center, with Alan. He comes to our meetings as a friend of the court and other people from the SBDC, and we work together because, first of all, you can be in business for 4 generations and then you launch something that's still new to you. I was the 4th generation in my retail company, but I opened the Boy Scout department, new schools. I established this thing called, it was Barish's Kids Store, Barish Bucks, where we'd give away toys and the kids would get dollars. So there were little side ventures or businesses. So that person might not be in touch with what it takes to start something. Even when I got my job, the search committee that interviewed me said, well, I see that you ran a 4th generation company, but did you ever start something? And I said, well, I started 2 children, but I had never started a business. I've started other things since then, but I would say my experience of launching something came after I closed down a business that had been there for 90 years. So the Small Business Development Center still has a role for me, and I have a role for them, and we do work together a lot. But it is interesting to sit down with business owners and make them walk through this kind of thing. When my son was in elementary school, he won an award in firematics. He came up with 9 escape routes from our house in case of a fire. And we had never really thought about exactly what to do. And then he picked the best one, and he sat down when he was 12 years old and instructed my wife and my daughter, this is what we do when there's a fire. And a lot of people die in fires because they haven't thought it through, or they go running back in for the dog, or family pictures, and they don't think it through. So there's something called a future fire drill, where you have establishing future memory. What will I do if I hit this sort of pothole? And that's where it comes in handy to talk to people who've been in that kind of pothole. So the community and the discussion has been great for people.
Right. Now you have a series of seminars that are coming up and are going to be ongoing throughout the year. We're taping this in January right now. Tell us about those and who your speakers are.
Okay, well, we have 6 dinner forums a year, and then we also have roundtables and other sorts of events, some breakfast events too. We have coming up in March Michael and Mick Kittredge. So Michael Kittredge, famous in this area for starting Yankee Candle after he taught himself how to make candles on his mother's stove in Holyoke and then South Hadley, sold the company, and then his son did a high school project or a college project on how to start a company. He had to do a case, so he did his father's business as a case and got so enthused that he went to his father and talked the father out of retirement, and now they have Kringle Candle and a restaurant and other businesses in Bernardston. And so we're going to have the 2 of them up on stage talking about what's the same, what's different, and other things like, you know, we're in retail, but we're also in the entertainment business. In April, we have a woman coming from North Carolina who is the great-great-great-great-granddaughter of Cornelius Vanderbilt, who started his business, basically most of the railroads in the country, with a $100 loan from his mother, family business. And this woman, Deanie Cecil Pickering, with her brother and her father, owned Biltmore Mansion in Asheville, North Carolina, the largest house in America. And they're going to be talking about a lot of things that they've done as a family and family council, and a lot of the helpful governance structures of family business, but also how they're growing this amazing place. I was down there a few months ago where they now have Segway tours through the woods, and they've basically rejuvenated the whole Asheville Chamber of Commerce by putting themselves on the line of Visit Asheville, and not just Biltmore, but all of Asheville. We have a man coming up later in the year, bringing him in from California, that wrote a book called The Rare Find. So he's done a study in numerous industries about how to find that person whose resume might be jagged. You know, even in my kids applying to college, I heard from a college coach that we used around here, the colleges don't really want the well-rounded kid, they want the sharp kid. They want the kid who's passionate about one thing or 3 things, but not who's done everything, just dabbled for their resume. And same thing in hiring for college, for a real job. There's people who look unlikely and you would never hire them, but they might be exactly what your organization needs. And other people that look perfect and it's not. And that's the same thing in a family business, by the way, where somebody might say, well, in the book Good to Great, they talk about first who, then what. Hire the right person, then figure out what they're going to do. Really impractical when you think about it. But on the other hand, if you know that your child needs a job and you crack and hire that kid because they need a job, they might be a geek and you're in a very low-tech industry, but they can design your web page and do social marketing and all sorts of stuff and find a place there, or you start a division for them. So there's other speakers too, and on our website, which is, if you just Google UMass Family Business Center, we come up first, and you can see the calendar. I also have an advice column, and there's several things, but you can see there's hundreds of articles, but you can see who's coming in for the rest of the year. One other interesting speaker is this man who is very big in the Harvard Negotiation Project, which is, you know, he basically is the second in command to William Ury that wrote Getting to Yes. So how to negotiate. And he's going to come in and do a talk about not only how to negotiate with your customers and suppliers, but your family members, and you know, including when you come into a room and there's 10 seats and you want the most powerful position, where to sit. So he's going to bring some of the rules of international diplomacy and negotiation into how to make it work for you and your family business size negotiations. So it's very interesting.
Are audience members, the small businesses that are there, allowed to interact with the speakers? Is there a question and answer?
There's a lot of interaction, and if you look at our website, there's a part of it called Praise from Presenters, where any number of people that we've had as presenters say, what I loved about speaking to the UMass Family Business Center is the audience is so hungry and so proactive, and they just push back a little bit, and they question, and they make me think about what I'm saying, and I encourage the audience, don't swallow any big theory, hook, line, and sinker. You can cherry pick and take these things home. And on our evaluation sheet, there's one question of, what gems did you get from this meeting tonight? And many times it'll be, the speaker was great, but what Chip said pushing back on what the speaker was saying, that's what I'm going to use tomorrow. So there's a lot of wisdom in the audience, and I encourage it.
Yeah, it's got to be. It's almost like professional development for a business owner. I'm on the school committee here in Ludlow, and we're always talking about professional development for our staff. I mean, even the custodians. Everybody can learn something new every day. So, but as a business owner, I guess you're always kind of hoping you're doing the right thing. But this is more of a, you could say, a professional development.
Well, and I have to say this too: is a lot of our members, it's inter-industry. So there's people who are in hospitality and manufacturing and retail and publishing and high tech, web design, every industry all together. Very different than an industry group, and I speak to a lot of industry groups, and they're smart organizations, but everybody's an exterminator, or everybody is a tree surgeon, or everybody is a manufacturer, and not only a manufacturer, but they make, titanium millionth of an inch tolerance parts for missiles. And I know I grew up on Long Island, where when I first moved in, it was a tree-lined street, and then Dutch elm disease came and killed every tree on the street. And a speaker who we had, Joel Barker, who's a very prominent writer and consultant in the business world, he brought the word paradigm from physics into business. Paradigm shift is his. And he just talks about the beauty of biodiversity, that if you don't just have Dutch elm disease, if you don't just have Dutch elm trees on your street, when Dutch elm disease comes in, it's going to kill every 5th tree and might not even spread from one tree to the next. So here's the same thing is, if you are only with people that have the same disease, everybody's going to be using the same cure. And if that cure is not the cure, or if the disease is going to build resistance to the cure. So we get a lot of discussion of, well, I don't know about manufacturing, but as a hospitality person, this would be the way that I see your problem. Yeah. And that really is a lot of wisdom that you're not going to get. I mean, that really is the out-of-the-box thinking that you're not going to get from people who are in the same box as you. And there's one person who's always in the same box as you, and that's you. So it's rare that anybody really gets out of their box. Yeah. Much better to talk to people who are in a different box.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I do that. I find myself doing that, listening to people like yourself talking, trying to find ways that it might fit into whatever situation I'm currently in my business. Let's go back a little bit. You mentioned you grew up in Long Island. How did you end up in Amherst? You up at UMass Amherst. How did that happen?
Well, I grew up in an area of Long Island that people were very proud to move away from. I mean, it's still a thriving area. The street that I grew up on, when I grew up there, it was half Jewish and half Italian. Now it's Indians and Iraqis and all sorts of, I just visited the Iraqi family that bought my parents' house from them, and they welcomed us in. And so I would say of the 600 people that were in my high school class, there's probably less than 10% that still live in that area. Everybody moved away. So a good friend of mine from high school ended up in Northampton, and I would visit him, and I just fell in love with the area. And so I had a plan after seeing the demise of our town where my store was, and people were advising me to open other units or move, and I really was tired of living on Long Island. No offense to Long Island. I also got sort of embroiled in this neighborhood issue where there was a builder who was knocking down houses and subdividing and knocking down trees, and I got into defending that with a group of other people and ended up getting sued for $6 million for harassment and defamation, which was thrown out. He ended up getting fined $1, and they put a tree ordinance, Long Island-wide tree ordinance, and they upzoned our neighborhood. So we won, but I got a few gray hairs out of that. Sure. And I was really tired of Long Island at the end of that, and I decided I was going to move to Northampton and open a children's clothing store, which would have all sorts of advantages over the children's clothing store that I had in Long Island. And I came up here and took a course in writing a business plan, because again, 4th generation, the founder didn't have a business plan. He basically was a peddler that put down his bag in front of the store that, became our store, and said, I'm never picking this bag up again, and he opened a retail store right there. 90 years later, I wrote a business plan of what would it be like to own a children's store in Northampton, and as I like to say, the business plan spoke to me. It said no. And I mentioned that to the person that taught the course at Westfield State, and he said, almost nobody ever hears no from their business plan. It's saying no, but they don't see it that way. Entrepreneurs are very optimistic. And so then just as I was thinking, what else can I do? This high school friend called up and said, I just saw an ad in the Gazette, and they're opening this thing called a Family Business Center. And I said first, what's a family business center? And then my next dumb question was, what's a family business? Even though I had grown up in one, and so did my parents, and so did my grandparents, it was a forest and trees situation. I never really gave it much thought because it just seemed like everybody works with their family. So I interviewed, I got the job, and started this thinking I'll do this until I can find a real job, and that is 18 years ago.
Wow. Well, it's an interesting.
Did I answer the question?
Yeah, no, you definitely answered the question. Interesting story. It's always interesting to hear somebody how they evolve into something like that. But as you were saying that, is there a definition of a family business? You know, I look at, I guess my business, you could say it's a family business, even though I'm the only one that's kind of running it. My wife helps out occasionally. But then you look at Demore's Big Y. You know, in 1936, they started literally a little family business. And now they're an enormous corporation and employ, you know, thank God for them because they employ so many people in this area. But is there a true definition to what the family business is and how large or small it is?
It depends on who you ask. I'm friendly with the world's foremost family business researchers, and they don't agree. One will say it needs to be multi-generational. So that means that at the moment that your parents retire and you're just working with 5 siblings, it's no longer a family business? I think not. They also don't count, certain of them don't count spousal businesses, copreneurs, as a family business. I disagree. Others say the ownership needs to be the majority, but then others say it only needs to be the major influence, like the Ford family only owns 4% of Ford Motor Company. That might be an old statistic, but that's a family business because they still impose their values on the business. So if you, as a sole proprietor whose wife might give you advice at 3 in the morning, think you're a family business, I would say, yes, you are. If Lewis and Clark Drug, which is now changed from their origins, but that was 2 college roommates in pharmacy school, Lewis and Clark, if they think that they're a family business, even before Clark brought his son in, Skip, then yes, I would say 2 partners not related to each other is a family business. I think certainly Big Y is a family business. I mean, they are in their 3rd generation. They have several 3rd generation members who are doing a lot of the right things in the right way. Family values. They are also social entrepreneurs, which is another one of the identifiers of a family business, where they have a vision of education and they have online tutoring and they pursue things in a certain way of giving back to the community that are more family business than some people who might not do any of those things. Also, I think that there's no line at which a Sam Walton that opens up one small store in Arkansas becomes not a family business. That's considered the largest family business in the United States. I would say Toyota is the largest family business in the United States. It still has a family member at the helm, and it still operates with a lot of its founding principles. Until last year, they had never laid off an employee. I mean, then they had to, but they maintained their family values. Crane Paper, founded in 1801 by Zenas Crane in Dalton, Massachusetts. Their first customer was Paul Revere. They went for years without a family member at the helm. They did have Crane family members in management, but not even upper management, and then they drafted somebody out of Yale University, Lansing Crane, to run that company again. So at what point was it not a family business, and what point was it a family business? So I think the definitions are broad, but a lot of it is if you think you are, you probably are, and if you think you're not, you still probably are.
Sure, yeah, it's kind of like that fish tank example. There's different levels, you know, there's large family. Because when I think of a family business, I'm thinking of the small baker down the street where I walk in and I either see him and his wife or his kids there, and you know, that to me is a family business. But I could certainly see the argument where you know, Ford or Big Y, certainly for that example, are still a family business. But it's just, I guess, the difference in size is another definition that you look at as well.
But I don't think you become out of touch with your values as you grow necessarily. And some of the largest businesses in the world, I mean, SC Johnson, a family company. That's their slogan, and so much that they do is based on doing the right thing family-wise. So, I mean, I would say you can be big and still be great.
Yeah. Well, it certainly is, you know, I mean, look at American history. It's the backbone of America. You know, it's what the nation grew on. I mean, it's why, certainly here in the Pioneer Valley, when the, you know, Mayflower first came, the reason Springfield was founded was a business opportunity for William Pynchon to sell furs, and it was strictly a business. And William Pynchon, John Pynchon, it was a family business. And you could look at probably anywhere in America and see that that was the basis of why that area grew, was prosperity, you know, to reach out further and expand.
Right.
You know.
And, you know, whether it's farming, where you think of your children as cheap labor, or whether it's manufacturing, where you just feel like you've imbued your family with so much of what it takes to the work ethic or whatever, there's every good reason to keep your family in there. But again, in the book Good to Great, they say you need to have the three circles: the talent, the passion, and the know-how of how to make money, or you shouldn't go into that job. And it's the same thing in family business. There's another three circles in family business, the same diagram, but it's management, family, and ownership. And so if you're in a family business, it's really important to sort of know which hat you're wearing. Or you, even if you're sitting with 5 people around a table, 2 of them might be family members, 2 of them might be owners, 1 of those owners is a family member. There's all sorts of overlaps. If you look at 3 circles and how they overlap, like Ballantine beer, there's 7 dimensions. And it's very important to clarify, speaking as a family member who's an owner, speaking as a manager who works in the business but doesn't own. So it's very complicated, the definitions. I mean, there's a lot of researchers that just pick this thing apart. And it needs to be picked apart, because there's a lot of findings lately, even of what are the best practices. And some of the foremost researchers in the world say there is hardly anything that is a best practice in family business. What you think that is right for your business to do because you heard that somebody else did it successfully, for instance, that your child should get 3 to 5 years of outside work experience, there's no reason, there's no correlation that doing that is going to be good for you or your kid or your business. But the people who seem the savviest and the most in touch with how to make their business succeed, and who have a loving gene pool, which is not something you can make out of thin air, tend to do that sort of thing. And so there's one researcher, Joe Astrachan, who I've had as a speaker a couple of times, and a friend of mine, says the diet, exercise, and no smoking of family business is boards of directors, family meetings, and strategic planning. Those 3 things actually help a family business succeed more than any other thing. But then you pick that apart. Harvard did a study of strategic planning, and they said strategic planning is great. The strategic plan, that's the product of that, is outdated by the time it's done. So, you know, there's a lot of things to look at, and luckily if you come from a warm, loving, productive, passionate, talented, entrepreneurial family, you can make it work. And just one other myth, if I could, that 2 out of 3 family businesses fail to make it to the 2nd generation, and then only half of the ones that make it to the 2nd generation make it to the 3rd generation. So that's always seen as why family businesses are unsustainable, without looking at the fact that all businesses fail at an average of 24 years, family or not. And there's almost no businesses on the planet older than 40 years old. So family businesses face all the same stuff and then some. They either face all the same stuff and have the family advantage, or they face all the same stuff and have the family disadvantage, depending on their family.
Well, is it fair to say that a family business fails after 24 years? I mean, say if that generation, that family, that man and woman, the family runs a business for 24 years, and the children move on to another business of some sort, or you know, worked in the public sector, they were able to provide for the families and, you know, sustain themselves for 24 years. Certainly wouldn't call that a failure.
Right. My van just failed after 150,000 miles.
Right, but you got everything that you could possibly ask out of it, right?
On the other hand, family business researchers say if you run your business for 24 years and sell it for $1 zillion, it failed. Because it's no longer a family business.
Well, I hope I fail in that way someday. How's the association with UMass Amherst? Is there some great benefits to that? Is there challenges with that?
Well, we are a UMass program. We're not a program that happens to be at UMass. We are in the continuing and professional education. We're a little bit of an oddball because most of what continuing and professional education does are not so-called outreach programs like ours. But we are 100% UMass. My paycheck is from UMass, but we don't spend any state money. All of our income is from member fees from the 65 member companies, and we have 6 corporate partners who also support a good chunk of our budget and give us excellent content, which is not selling their wares, but advising. Can I mention who they are?
Absolutely.
6 local firms, Epstein Financial Services, Bulkley Richardson Gelinas Law Firm, Giambetti Associates, Myers Brothers Kalicka Accounting Firm, Health New England, and we're about to get a new bank sponsor, and I won't mention it until tomorrow. I'm supposed to get a yes, but that will be our new sponsor. And you can see on our website who that bank is.
Right.
But all of our income comes from that. But there's a great benefit to being part of a university. First of all, I have the support of a lot of people who feel like a public university, especially, more than a private university, has a land grant obligation to give back to the community. I mean, a few years ago the term was outreach. Now outreach is a term nationally sort of fading, but that we engage the non-traditional student, but we do it in a way that can use the resources of the university. And so, for one thing, for instance, is there's a couple of professors at UMass Eisenberg School of Management that once a year need businesses to send their intern teams to, undergrad and MBA. And they see me as a great connector into the community. I know a lot of businesses, whether they're members or not, and I provide the hookup between companies and these MBA teams. And so there's a lot of local companies that have gotten that sort of support who've also then supported undergrad and MBA graduate students. I've used a lot of faculty members. I go in and I give guest lectures. I might be teaching an MBA course this fall. There's countless reasons to be thankful. Not to mention that if I call up and I say, this is the UMass Family Business Center, it gives me an instant credibility that this person is not going to be trying to sell me something that I don't need. And I'm glad to say I have nothing to sell except to provide you with a resource.
Yeah, exactly. Well, it's interesting. I certainly encourage everybody. We're going to put the graphic up at the end with the website connection where people can go to. Is there a phone number that if anybody has questions that they can reach out to?
It's area code 413-545-4545.
Okay. Well, I appreciate you coming in. It's always interesting talking about the Pioneer Valley and the benefits to a family business or a small business. Maybe I find it interesting because I'm involved in that as well too. But I think anybody who's even working in some other sector could certainly might know somebody or learn from something like this.
And please, if you know of a family business, please send them my way. I'd love to have them as a guest at one of our events, and that's how we get most of our members, is them just taking a free look at it.
Yeah, exactly. Well, that is going to do it for this week's show.
Thank you.
This week we talked to Mr. Ira Bryck. He's the director of the Family Business Center up at UMass Amherst. And if you do have any questions or comments, certainly reach out to their website or call Ira on the phone number he just left. And that's going to do it for this week. Thank you very much for tuning in.